Today, we're talking about EU foreign policy.
So this may not seem like the sexiest topic out there, especially because it's kind of hard to see the impact of security in our daily lives.
Right, but it's huge. I mean, look at Ukraine. For the first time in its history, the EU reacted fast and in a compact way to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And the impact this has had on our daily lives, I mean, the decision of the EU member states has had a cost of living implication, the energy crisis. We opened the borders to a huge wave of refugees and kind of even overcoming a previous issue on the matter that the member states had and still have in a way.
At the same time, it also really helped see where Europe stands militarily, which is not something we see every day. And it also heightened this division that was already kind of there between the northeastern part of the region and the south and the west. Absolutely.
And I think the issue was precisely about this division, that all decisions had to be taken unanimously by member states. So for the first time in European history, we are really putting on the table the option to change the way our foreign policy works. So the question that I had for our experts today is, has the war in Ukraine put on the table the option for a common European foreign policy? Hi, I'm Elena Pompei.
And I'm René Bertini.
And this is Getting There, a podcast by ENTR in collaboration with France 24 and RFI.
We're two Italian journalists. We live in France and we work in English. And we're part of the first generation who could truly see what a united Europe looks like.
We can move and work freely across Europe. We use the same currency in almost every EU country. So we want to know what is next for the Union and how to get there. So to understand the impact that the war in Ukraine has had on the EU balance, if you may, I've spoken to two people who have very different roles from inside the EU bubble. Let's first hear from Susi Dennison. She's a senior policy fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations.
We've seen a sea change with Russia's invasion of Ukraine in terms of European member states' willingness to act collectively in the fields of security and defence. There has been collective reflection, collective resource, and sort of political momentum behind the idea of this being something which required a single European response. In theory, the capacity to do that has been there since the Lisbon Treaty. In practice, the High Representative for Foreign and Security Policy has always been a bit of an emblematic post that in practice, member states didn't give much authority to.
So if the High Representative for Foreign Policy doesn't really have any direct decision-making power, who does?
Well, him, because it's Joseph Borrell now, and the European External Action Service are kind of like the diplomatic body of the EU. And so it's very symbolic. The place where we actually have all of the decision-making is actually the European Council.
Which is not to be confused with the Council of the EU.
Or the Council of Europe. Terrible choice of words.
Terrible wording, really. Doesn't make any sense.
Anyway, in the European Council, every decision needs to be unanimous. This is why we spoke to Peter Stano, who is the EU foreign policy spokesperson.
This consensus takes a lot of time. In case of Ukraine, it lasted very, very short time. So it was done very fast. But in other issues, for example, Israel or Gaza, the consensus takes a lot of time. So the lesson is the unanimity is sometimes, quite often actually, undermining our effectiveness, our speed, and also our credibility outside.
Well, now the issue with unanimity is clearly you have 27 member states that have very different national interests, and they have to agree on crucial issues, which are, military budget. I mean, it's huge. And while with Ukraine, these decisions were made very fast because the urgency was there, that is not usually the case. So something that has been gaining momentum is the option for a QMV, a qualified majority vote, which could take the place of unanimity. Now, obviously, that is a hard sell for member states.
For sure. And the QMV wasn't even on the table before, Ukraine happened. So even just the fact that it's being discussed is huge. And, there was this obviously big momentum at the start of the war, which made this discussion happen. But is this momentum ongoing? Will it be sustained?
I mean, while it's true that Europe made a show of solidarity that they'd never done before, at the same time, what solidarity looks like for member states has changed over the past 2 years. So the momentum that was there at the beginning isn't quite the same right now. You have countries that are bordering with Ukraine that obviously feel, like Poland, Romania, that they are the first on the front lines, really, on this Russian aggression. And then at the same time, you have, more Western European and Southern European countries like Italy, Spain, even Germany, that have been more vocal about finding a fast solution to the conflict, made that even look like ceding Ukrainian territories to Russia.
Yeah, and obviously, as you were saying, making unanimous decisions is extremely hard with all of these competing interests from different governments. And it may become even harder as Europe goes towards the option of enlargement in the future. So passing from a union of 27 to a union of 35.
There is an acknowledgement of the realities of an EU at 35 or more, and the fact that at some point, if we want to do things more efficiently, if we want to push decisions through, then we may have to look at whether QMV should be used in more voting areas. That's not politically palatable at the moment for the current member states. And actually, if you look at the broader conversations around where the EU is and the future of the project, there's more of a sense that let's call it the less pro-European EU governments are driving a parallel agenda, which is about, well, if we can't all come to collective agreements, then maybe we should be doing less at European level, which is running counter to the argument which is being pushed from the Commission about the need for a more geopolitically equipped EU. For me, the jury is very much out.
So you have national governments having to protect national interests. And at the same time, we see, a huge wave of Eurosceptic governments that are on the rise around Europe, right? So this means that delegating certain decisions to Europe is becoming less and less likely as time goes by. Especially when you think that to do so, you would have to change Europe's foundational treaties. And that really does take time.
I think everyone is quite clear about the fact that we will need to change the way how we work, because with 27 it's difficult enough, and with 30 or 32 or 35 it will be even more difficult. This is something for the period to come, because things do not happen overnight in the European Union. We are in the process. The European Union is an organization that evolves in response to what is going on inside the EU and also around us. But we started this process. There is a momentum.
When Peter says there is momentum, how will this translate to action? Will it translate to action? And will the outcome of the EU election influence this?
It's hard to say. As Susi said earlier, that is a very tough sell for national governments. Now, the mandate for the current EU institution is going to expire in autumn. So we're going to have a different parliament. We're voting in June. We're also going to have a different high representative, a different commission. And so these kind of decisions will depend on that as well. But to be honest, the really big difference is going to be made by which governments each member state elects. And so on the basis of that, on one of the biggest elections here that we've ever seen, vote wisely.
So thank you for listening today, and we'll see you next week.
This episode of Getting There was hosted by Elena Pompei and René Bettini, produced by Elena Pompei and René Bettini, filmed by Guillaume Gugin and Joël Brangui. Thank you to RFI for technical support, and thank you to Susi Dennison and Peter Stano for their time and expertise.